All right, friends. As regular listeners know, yeah, this is a sports show often, typically a golf centric show, or at least on many occasions. But as regular listeners also know, not just limited to the fields of play. This is a sport and society program. This is the intersection of course and culture, as I like to call it. Perhaps no greater competition than what we're going to see about 90 days from now. Yes, that be the midterm elections going to take place on November 8th. Our district here, California 41, represents basically all of the Coachella Valley. It is a redrawn district, and we're looking at that as potentially a really good thing. Actually, the nation is looking at that. This race has gotten a lot of attention. With that, it's my pleasure to welcome this week's guest. He is SoCal born and bred. He's got an academic career that is simply off the charts, to state it simply. Former federal prosecutor working in counterterrorism and counterintelligence, and our Democratic candidate to be the congressman for California 41. With that, I welcome Will Rollins to the Spicer Speaking podcast. Hello, Will.
Hello, Judd. Thank you for having me on.
Did I get all that right?
You did. Yes, you did. And I'm so glad we're starting with my bio and not golf, because I suck at golf. So
Oh, you're not alone. Fear not. And rest assured, we will get to some golf driven questions. But let's start with this. As mentioned, your career as a federal prosecutor. You are obviously now segueing into politics. What was the impetus for joining the race, Will?
yeah, so I I spent a lot of my childhood wanting to work in national security, actually. And when September 11th happened, I was a junior and saw the North Tower of the World Trade Center collapse on TV. Thought about enlisting, but don't ask, don't tell was still in place. I was closeted, scared of being outed, so thought I would find a different path into service. Went to Dartmouth, took Arabic, thought about joining the CIA. Really sucked at Arabic, so knew I'd have to find a different path than the CIA as a linguist. Eventually made it to Columbia Law School and clerked for a couple judges. Got hired into the Justice Department as a federal prosecutor, and loved being a part of the team that specializes in counterterrorism and counterintelligence cases. But after I was hired, saw a huge rise. I was hired in 2016, and over the last 5-6 years, saw a huge rise in the threats from domestic extremism. So whether it was the neo-Nazis going after Charlottesville, or QAnon conspiracy theorists going after Navy hospital ships because they thought COVID was part of a government conspiracy, huge rise in hate crimes against Asian Americans, huge rise in anti-Semitism, and then January 6th. And it was that event, and seeing somebody like my opponent, Ken Calvert, vote to overturn the election just hours after 140 cops were injured trying to protect people like him inside during what was supposed to be a peaceful transfer of power, that inspired me to get into the race. I mean, he's somebody who called for dropping charges against these people. And as someone who believes in the rule of law, who comes from a family of Republicans and Democrats alike, I just think that there are things that transcend party and any one president in the United States. And we got to have candidates step up to campaign on those values. And so that's why I entered the race in October of 2021.
Seems to be an echo in your impressive career, Will, that the onus for becoming a federal prosecutor after 9/11, which previous to COVID and January 6th, I still look at as the defining moment, tragically, in my lifetime and for my generation. And then after January 6th, as you noted, that was the impetus for you to join the race. I mean, did you feel like working as a federal prosecutor, did that sate you? Did it satisfy you? Did you feel like you were able to make a tangible difference?
Yeah, I loved that job. I mean, there is nothing better than being a part of the team that helps protect the country from the threats that we face from Russia, China, Iran, ISIS. And that was a great job. I was good at it. Really loved working with the FBI squads across the Central District of California. It covers about 20 million people, including all of Riverside County. Incredibly dedicated men and women in law enforcement who I think share the ideals that I just articulated. It's like the country is really about the rule of law, our institutions, the republic, the ability to disagree constructively and have debates about ideas and be a beacon for the globe democratically. And I think, and leading the free world. And I think having that role for the United States is something that all of us should be incredibly proud to inherit and proud to protect. And, trying to recenter the country and trying to take out some of these ultra MAGA extremists, I think is a really important part of bringing Americans together and having community again, because I think people want to be able to go to their Little League games and not, get caught up in a debate about non-existent voter fraud, or, relitigating QAnon conspiracy theories. I think people are sick of it. And I think living in a fact-based universe where we have good-natured disagreements that are productive, that move the country forward, is something that, people are really, really craving at this moment.
Whether it be your friends, your family, your immediate family, your colleagues, when you decided to make this congressional run, did you have people saying, I don't know, Will, you got it pretty good, maybe you don't want to get into politics? Was there a percentage of that inner circle that was trying to tell you not to do it?
Oh yeah, a lot of people said you're crazy. Why would you do it at this moment? Look at what just happened to the U.S. Capitol. Look at the threats that lawmakers are getting, right? I mean, and running is in a lot of ways brutal, but it's also an incredible privilege to be able to live in a country where my candidacy is even possible because of the progress that the United States has made on issues like LGBTQ rights. And it tells us something about our promise as a country. And I think that being able to be visible and out there and campaigning for the kinds of ideals that I talked about, I think all of us have a responsibility as Americans to think about how we are going to end the kind of extremism that is weakening the United States, and that in counterintelligence, I saw being exploited by adversaries like Russia and China, because they want to see Americans at each other's throats. And as brutal as our political process is, and as broken as our campaign finance system is, and let me tell you, the money is the absolute worst part of both running, and it just distorts so many aspects of our public policy choices as a country, that I would I hope to God when I get there that I can do something to end it. But having said all that, we are still the greatest country on earth with the greatest promise on earth and best hope for humanity. And we just need people to get engaged and step up and vote and ensure that we stay that way, because democracy is not a spectator sport. And that's ultimately, I was sick of being on the sidelines and complaining and not doing anything, and felt like I would look back on my life and regret not stepping up at this moment.
Will, you mentioned your opponent's name. I think I probably don't need to mention it again. Let's remind listeners, though, that he has had his job for several decades. I think it's about 30 years, based on a prior electorate before this district has redrawn. Between the two of you, whether it be the ideals you mentioned, purview, personality, policy, I cannot imagine a more stark contrast on this ballot between the two of you. How do you see that between yourself and your opponent? Pretty stark?
Absolutely. And it's really stark on some absolutely crucial issues that are affecting the country right now. You look at things like abortion access, and whether the government should be able to tell you what happens in your bedroom, whether the government should be able to mandate pregnancies, for women who are told that their pregnancy is not viable, and then the government to come in and say, nope, you must carry that pregnancy to term, no matter what. That's something that Ken Calvert believes in. He joined the suit to overturn Roe. He believes that women should not be able to control their own bodies. And as we just saw in Kansas, even the vast majority of Republicans don't agree with that position. And when you're, running against somebody who is that extreme, I think it is a lot easier for somebody like me as a mainstream candidate to bring in those moderate Republicans who just don't agree with some of his votes, for example, like allowing child predators to sue to prevent their victims from getting an abortion. That is an extreme radical position that is out of touch with Southern California. You look at basic gun safety, and look, I got taught to shoot when I was 6 years old by my grandfather with a hunting rifle in Maine and a six-shooter. But you talk to NRA members, even you talk to Republican gun owners, and the idea that you would vote against red flag laws, which is something my opponent just did, so that a person who threatens to shoot up a school can walk into a gun store the next day and buy a gun. That is a radical, extreme position, and it's one that law enforcement doesn't agree with. It's one that moderate Republicans don't agree with, and it's one that really 80 to 90% of the American public doesn't agree with it. And so I think, things like that are bipartisan, and I am really excited to campaign on building consensus around this in our congressional district, because I see it in communities when I'm out talking to voters. People want somebody to represent us in DC who is going to have basic common sense about protecting reproductive freedom and protecting our kids at school.
Well, you touched upon several of the issues in this election, and an undoubtedly divisive time in our country. We could talk about those issues, all of which are important for many hours. But for you, if and when you are elected, hopefully it's the latter. If there's one or maybe two that's you feel like is really your sweet spot, that you really want to have opportunity to focus on to make a difference while in Washington, what might that one or perhaps two issues be?
Anti-corruption reform. And I kind of alluded to this earlier, right? And I think when you run against somebody who is labeled one of the most corrupt members of Congress repeatedly for several years in a row, and you look at just the experience of being a candidate and needing to raise money to win, to become viable, you realize on a personal level just how broken the system is and what the barriers to entry are for people like a nurse, a firefighter, a cop, people who are on one income, who cannot afford to quit their job for a year and run for office. The fact that our system is set up to reward ultra wealthy people who want to enter politics, the fact that the system is set up to reward politicians who get massive corporate campaign contributions, tells you how those votes will go when they matter, right? And I always think about the example of gas prices, because Shell just posted $9 billion in a record quarterly profit recently. Their profit margins are at 20%. They've told shareholders on earnings calls that they don't plan to expand production because they're already making money hand over fist. And my opponent just voted against the price gouging legislation because I believe he receives hundreds of thousands of dollars in campaign contributions from the oil and gas industry. And so that is an example of why corruption has infected our entire political structure, and why, and this is a bipartisan problem, but in this particular race, I think that's a really strong contrast. And so trying to run and get corporate money out of politics, getting dark money out of politics, those things are incredibly important to me, and certainly what I hope to push for when I'm elected.
Friends, you're tuning in to the Spicer Speaking podcast. My guest is our Democratic candidate for California 41, become our next congressman for where we live right here in the Coachella Valley. You can find out more about Will, a lot of things that we just talked about, his backdrop as well, at willrollinsforcongress.com. I also like to follow Will on Twitter. That's at Will Rollins CA. Will, I want to clarify one thing. I think that folks can also have opportunity to visit with you or hear more from you. I believe it's next Wednesday, August 17th, that there's an upcoming town hall to which there is online access as well as in person. Did I get that right?
Yes, that's right. We're doing a town hall next week in Wildomar, and we're going to be doing those all the way up to the election and trying to meet with as many folks as possible.
Speaking of meeting with folks, Will, when you're going around the desert and the surrounds, meeting people, going to events, shaking hands, kissing babies, what are you most often hearing are the concerns for people that live here in Palm Springs and the entirety of the Coachella Valley?
I mean, right now, there's no question that costs are a concern for people. And, I've talked to voters in this district who are having to make the choice week to week on whether they buy gas or buy groceries for their families. I mean, that is a remarkably horrible choice that people are being confronted with in this moment. And I think candidates and congressional representatives owe them an explanation for what they plan to do about it, because prices are rising on working families. And so, I think this is related in a lot of ways to what I was talking about a second ago. And we've reached a point in the United States where obviously I am a strong believer in the benefits of capitalism. And I think capitalism means that you've got competitive markets. And so when there are only four massive oil and gas corporations, basically in the United States, that can set prices, those are monopolies. And that's why people like Warren Buffett will tell you they invest in those companies. They have, he calls them, they have moats up around their markets because they can set prices. And so, one thing that I've talked a lot about is how do we strengthen our antitrust rules and give the Justice Department the tools they need, similar to what Teddy Roosevelt did in the early 20th century, to really break up some of these trusts, some of these massive monopolies that have been able to price gouge. And I think it's important that we have representatives who are going to put the interests of consumers and working families ahead of these massive corporations that have been able to turn huge profits. And the same thing is true really in agribusiness as well. Like those rising grocery costs, again, often dictated by a handful of massive agribusiness corporations. And look, I didn't know just how concentrated these markets were until I became a candidate in a lot of ways. And it's educating myself about the way that our markets have become so dominated by a handful of companies, and being intellectually honest about a proposal to fix it, and also to meaningfully put more money into the pockets of working families who are dealing with these rising costs. Those are the things that I want to do when I'm elected. And I think the contrast couldn't be clearer between somebody who, the average to median income in Riverside County, $70,000 to $100,000 per year per household. The average marginal tax rate on some of those households, upwards of 20%, sometimes upwards of 30% in California. And when the wealthiest 400 families in the United States are paying an average of 8%, some of them paying $0 per year federal income tax. Same with massive 50 largest corporations in the United States paid $0 in federal income tax last year. That's just not fair to people who work for a living. And we should not be paying higher rates than the largest corporations in the US and the ultra wealthy in the US. So trying to tackle that is a big part of my campaign too.
Well, Will, undoubtedly getting around the desert proper again. When you visit the social media accounts, got pictures of you all over different parts of the desert. For you personally, what do you enjoy about the Coachella Valley, the Palm Springs area, whether it be fun, for kicks, for leisure, for dining? Feel free to give a couple free plugs if you want, but curious as to what you personally enjoy about the desert.
Yeah, so as I mentioned at the top, I really suck at golf, although I do actually enjoy playing it from time to time. And one of my best friends growing up is a golf pro, believe it or not. So I've had a lot of fun over the years playing with him. And I typically will, shoot like a 3-digit score on a 9-hole par 3. That's usually where I'm at. But I think the last time I played in the Coachella Valley was probably at someone's bachelor party at the Eagle Falls course in Indio. Sure. And that was maybe 2 years ago. But when I'm not doing that, which is often, I think hiking around here is incredible. Obviously, we've got some great trails. The Cactus to Clouds Trail is incredible. We also, my partner and I were in Canyon Lake last year, and that's a beautiful spot too. It's on the other side of the district, not in the valley, but a beautiful lake, place where I grew up spending a lot of time on the water. Parents were water skiers, and that's obviously a great sport too. So we've got a lot of great options in this congressional district overall. And the only question is when my campaign manager allows me to leave the cell that I'm currently sitting in. So.
For those watching this on YouTube, you can understand Will's reference for the cell. Sounds like your golf game needs a little work. I mean, golf here in the desert, Will, it's not just an opportunity to go knock it around. I mean, this is $1 billion annual industry. We have 120 golf courses here, which means that it employs a lot of people, which means that a lot of people moved here. Their homes are located at country clubs or on golf courses, and that is specifically why they moved here. I mean, to me, it's not just a part of the lifestyle and all the money that it creates and all the tourism that it creates, but it is part of why people move here or why people snowbird here. So we need to get the club in your hand a little bit more. I know it's an active time. What do you need to work on, you think? You said you've got the close friend that is a club pro. What did he or she tell you that you need to improve on?
Oh, my driver game is I'm a very vain golfer. So if I have a good tee shot with a driver, I don't really care about any of my follow-up shots. The problem is that my tee shots are the worst, and those are the most high pressure shots. So you really gotta, that's where I'm really focused. But some of my recovery shots are not bad. In fact, a friend got married in Virginia last year, and we played a round at Kingsmill Resort, and we played best ball, and we won money in that one, despite me being on that team. So that's that's a testament to my recovery shots, but it's mainly my issues off the tee. And of course, the question is, how much can you really invest in improving your swing when it is as broken as mine is? Like, do you just go all in on your sort of crappy swing and stick with it and make marginal improvements and kind of, or do you do a complete revamp, in which case you really got to devote, you got to devote some serious time to the revamp?
It's a good question, and I'm not going to take it as a rhetorical one because there are different schools of thought on that. Some people will tell you that it's all that you will want to rebuild and basically start with the grip and then just build it up from there. Others will tell you that at a certain point in life, depending how much time you can invest in actually practicing or instruction, you just got to own your swing, man. And for those that have played with me, if even but once, they'll know that I do not have an aesthetically pleasing swing, but it is effective. And ultimately, the objective of the game is to get the biscuit in the basket, Will. One other follow-up point is that your own self-assessment on driving the ball, after living out here about a dozen years, playing more and more golf, both in the the desert rather, and around SoCal, and around the world. I've had the pleasure to do that. I've learned more and more. Others are going to debate me on this, but that the driver is the most important club for most players. You might have magic hands and be able to have some great chips and some great saves, but for the average player, if you're not starting in the fairway on 14 holes on a golf course, you're probably not going to make very many pars. So all that said, when you're ready and when you have time to invest a little bit more in your golf game, got some suggestions for you for those you can see, some instruction. And let's get that driver. Let's get that driver shored up. It's going to make golf a lot more enjoyable for you, Will.
Yeah, that's right. I got to stay away from the 9-hole par threes. That's my issue.
I mean, sometimes those can be helpful for your game. That could be a different subject for a different show, but here's an idea and perhaps a final thought for you today, Will. You ever been to Sunnylands?
Not yet, actually.
Okay.
I have not. Yeah.
Okay. I've been there a few times in the not too distant past. Had opportunity to play golf at Sunnylands, and an article on that, as I mentioned to listeners last week, that just came out in McKellar magazine. Kind of a white whale of golf to even get on that course. But Sunnylands has hosted between Eisenhower and Obama, every president save for LBJ and Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was not a golfer. So if and when you win, Will, and again, we're aiming for the ladder there, certainly. I think that we should try to get out to Sunnylands and we should go play, bring the politicos back to the heart of the desert there in Rancho Mirage. Are you up for that? Should we try to get around there when you become our congressman?
I'm absolutely up for that. And then the only thing we need to work on in advance is me not embarrassing myself out there. But we can devote a lot of time to practice before that happens.
Well, I appreciate the interest. Not an easy ticket to get, but after the election, I'm going to try to make that happen for us, Will. Until then, so appreciative of your time. A real pleasure visiting with you again, friends and listeners. Will Rollins for Congress.com, or follow Will on the campaign trail. I go with the Twitter roots. That's at Will Rollins CA. All the best to you in the run, Will. And again, thanks for joining the Spice for Speaking podcast, sir.
Thanks for having me on, Judd. Really appreciate it.